Welcome to this video series and our final video for the IT or Information Technology Prac Exam Paper 1 for 2023. This is not the November paper, this is the June supplementary paper. So let's do the last final question which can help us with our arrays most probably. Just a reminder before we get into it that there is a link in the video description for the data files which you can then go and practice on and then come back and see if you can pick up where you made your mistakes, as well as links to the individual questions, as well as links to the other videos that cover the other questions. So let's look at this question. A reminder that when you're doing the last question, this is probably the part of the exam paper where you are running out of time and you're just trying to get the marks. So let's break it down into strategies and steps that we can do in order to maximize the marks. Even if we don't get all of them, we can try to get the most marks available, especially if you are running out of time. So we are dealing with some sort of Wi-Fi coverage system, and let's go to our array description. So they give us a two-dimensional array, and the array is broken up into a grid with 5 rows and 6 columns. So it's a 5 by 6 array of characters, and you can see that there's underscores and then an A, which I'm assuming is going to be the access points. And then they tell us the letter A is the access point where the underscore is an empty space. That's great. Okay, so then they tell us write code to display the provided array in a rich edit that looks like this. So we want to say the access points at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 there, and then we want to say a 1 and then where that access point is. So let's go look at the GUI. So here we've got the GUI. If we go to the code, remember to put your examination number there, we can see what the array looks like. So it looks exactly like they said. Remember, it's first 5 as the first range and then 6 as the second. That's going to help us determine when we display it, when we use the array. So let's click on display. So we want to display in that rich edit. So the first thing I want to do, we want to get the marks. So let's start off with getting the word access points and getting the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's get that. So we're going to say the rich edit lines.add, and we're going to add the word access points. I think it was small letters for the P, and then we're going to do the exact same thing again. But then we're going to put I think we're going to put a little bit of a space there. If you look there, there's a bit of space and then a 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's try that. Space 1, space 2, play 3. So let's just see that we got that working first of all. So display, okay, we might want to shift that up by 1 space, that it's got a little bit of a gap, but it looks like we are on track. So let's just put a space over there. So it's very important to do that because there are marks even for that little step. So make sure that you do that. So whenever we do this, we're going to have to loop for row 1 and display row 1, and then we're going to have to repeat that process for all of the rows. So what I tend to do, like we've done in previous videos, is I try to do one line, get it working, and then we repeat that process for the other 5 lines. Let's just get the first one working. So let's just do that first row. So we know that we're going to have a 1 and then we're going to have all the values in the array in the first one. So we're going to display all of those values. So we're going to go through number 1, which is row 1, but we're going to go through the 6 points. We're going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 6. So let's see how we do. I'm going to make a sLine variable. That's going to be my string that I construct that's going to be displayed. And I'm going to start off by making it equal to the null string. It's got nothing in it. Okay, actually we're going to start off, we actually want to give it a 1. I'm going to give it a 1 with a space. Maybe that. Let's try that. We might have to take the space away, but let's just try that. Let's put a 1 and a space. Okay, so that's what it starts off being. Then we are going to loop. So we are looping through the different columns. So I'm going to make that icol, which is going to go from 1 until 6 because there are 6 columns. That's why we've got 6 headings there. And what we're going to do, I must probably declare icol as a type integer. And we're going to say sLine is equal to whatever's in sLine plus the value in the array networks. We are dealing with number 1 every single time. I think it's network, not networks. Maybe that's why there's error. There we go. We are always dealing with the first row, but we're going to deal with first column, then the second, then the third. We're going to keep adding icol onto sLine, and then we're probably going to put a space at the end of it so that we create that position and then a gap, a position and a gap. Let's try that. So we are starting with the 1 and a space, then we're going to add on the first value, the first column from row 1 and then a space, then the second column from row 1 and so on. And then once we have completed that, I actually can put a begin end here just so that we can visually see that that's the end of the loop. Then once that's done, then I'm going to say my rich edit lines.add, and we're going to add this sLine. Let's just see what that does. So let's display. Okay, so there we go. So it looks pretty good. We could probably shift that up one more space. Let's try that. So let's go do a space there and a space there. See if it lines up. There we go. So it looks like it's nicely aligned. I'm happy with that. So it's working for row 1. Now I want to repeat that process for the 5 rows. Now take note, I don't want to do the headings 5 times. I just want to do this part 5 times. So over this part. So this is my inner loop. All of this is my inner loop. And I want to repeat that. So I'm going to go for the number of rows. So let's make an R row value. We're going to say for our row is going to start at 1. And how many rows are there? There are 5 rows. We are going to do all of this code 5 times. So this is the end of my outer. Okay, so that's going to repeat that 5 times. So let's run it and see that it gets 5 rows. There we go. But we don't want to do the first row 5 times. We want to do 1 and then 2. So that mustn't actually be a 1. It needs to actually be the value R row plus the space. So it'll be a 1 and then do all of this, and then a 2 and do all of this. But we must convert that from a int to a string. So let's run and test that. So it's still doing the first row 5 times, but at least our headings are going 1 to 5. That's a good thing. And then the other thing over here, this 1, we don't do 1 every time. We want to do row 1 and then row 2. So that we can change to our row. And just by making those 2 changes, we've made the 2 loops work together. And there we can see, if we look at the data, our results are exactly the same as their results. So there we go. We've got it working. So that's the display. 4.2, the program must be able to capture the addition of a new access point, and we're going to use a row and a column value to say where it must be added. So if you say row 2, column 5, then we would want to put an access point over there. So we're going to extract those values. We're going to add an access point to that location. In other words, we're probably going to change it to an A. But there are 2 possibilities of things going wrong. First of all, if it's already got an A, then we've got to say, hey, that's a problem. Let's give a specific error message. And we can't have more than 2 access points in a row. So the moment we have 2 already in there, we can't do it. So we can't go 3 or more in a particular row. So if we add 1, for example, there, and we add another one to row 3, it'll go, hey, no, there's too many. We can only have 2 in a row. So the maximum number in a row is 2. So what I'm going to do is so there's the 2 values. So let's first get the input. Let's get the marks. So I'm going to get, for example, a R selected row and an R selected column. The reason is because I might need to loop, so that's why I do that. First thing I want to do is I actually need to count how many access points are in that particular row that we're looking at, just in case we have not enough space. Maybe we've got too many. So I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to do a Dracula variable, an R count Dracula variable, and we're going to loop. So I'm going to make an R variable. So which row are we looping through? So we're looping through that row. So let's first get that row. So R selected row is going to be from the spin edit 242 for the row. The dot value will give me the value. So for example, let's say we want to get row 2, and then my selected column is going to be from the spin edit for the selected column dot value. And let's say that's number 5. So we're looking at row 2, number 5. That's where we want to put our access point. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to go through the selected row, row 2, and count how many of access points are already there. So I'm going to initialize my R count. So this is my counting. So this is counting the number of A's in a row. And not in a row, in selected row, because we're only looking at that particular row. So remember that. So we're going to set our count variable to 0, and we're going to loop now how many values are in a row. One row will have 6 columns. So we're going to go from 1 to 6. And all I'm doing is I'm asking the question, if array network. Now remember, we're looking at the one that is selected. We're always looking at that one. We don't care about the other ones, just the one that we're working at. And we're looking at R. So the first column, the second column of that row. If that equals to an A in the array network array, then we're going to increase our count because we found an access point. That's just going to allow us to count how many access points we've got in that particular row. Okay, so we've got how many are in the row. We've got which ones we want to change. Now the first thing I'm going to ask, if array network, let's find out if there's already an A there. If my selected row and my selected column is already equal to an A, then we must display a message. What message do they want us to display? Give us an example. Access point already installed at this location. So that's what I want to type in. Show message, and we're going to type in that message. So there's my message. I already typed it all out. So there we go. That's what happens if we select a row and column and it's already an A. So that's our first option. Then our next option is that that value is already a 2. If it's 2 or less, we can do it. If it's not, it's a problem. So if my count variable is greater than equal to 2, because then we can't add any more. It's already got 2, we can't add more. So it's already equal to 2. Then we want to display another message. I'm going to copy this, paste it here. And what's the message we want to display? There are already 3 access points in the row. Did I read that wrong? Let's go double check here. It says here a maximum number of 3 access points in a row is allowed. So we're allowed to have 3. We just can't have more than 3. So, okay, so let's change my code then. If we've counted the number of A's there and it's greater than equal to 3, then we have already too many access points. So then I'm going to sum here and say there are already 3 access points in this row. So if we selected a row and a column that already has an A, we display the message. If we've counted that that row already has 3 or more access points, then we're going to say, hey, we've already have 3 access points at that point. If it's greater than equal to 3. If it's neither of those options, then we have a viable access point, which means we can set that particular row and that particular column's value to an A. So then that's the third option. So if there's already an A, we say, hey, there's already A. If it's 3 or more, we can't put it there. But if it's not an A and it's not 3 or more, we can change it to an A. So let's go run it. So let's just display our results first. Now let's pick one that's already 1. So we know that row 3, column 5 already has an access point. So let's say add access point. It says that the access point is already in that location. That is correct. So let's do row 3, column 1. Add an access point and then let's redisplay it. Just by the note, with my display, I'm actually going to clear this rich edit every time so that we can see the result. Every time we click on this button, we can see the updated result. So let's do that first. So we display our results. So let's first test it out. Now, what happens if we do column 1 of row 3? Add an access point. Let's display it. Did you notice how that's now changed to an A? So that's correct. Let's do 3 and column 3. So that's going to change to an access point. So add an access point. Nothing happens. So let's display it. Boom. That's correct. Now, if I add another one, let's add another one at position 6. Now, do you notice that there are 3 access points? There's already too many in row 3. Well, not too many. There's enough in row 3. We can't add another one to row 3. Let's add access point. No, there's already 3 there. We can't do anything. If I display, nothing changes. There we go. So I think that is working. So let's move on to the next question. Now the last question for this paper. 4.3. A grid is used to determine the blocks locations at the campus that will have coverage. Each access point has the capacity to provide a signal to all the blocks around it. So like a little grid around that A. So all the blocks around it, both above and below it, and to the side and diagonally across from it. So we want to mark this with a star. So we're going to add coverage symbols around all the access points in the campus network. So we're going to put stars around them, and then we're going to display the array. So we want something that looks like that. So there's a couple of things to take note of that I will need us to be aware of. So I've got this in Excel so we can talk about this. So there's an example of what we want. Let's take that particular access point. Let's say we find an access point. We know that it is row 3, column 5. So we want to put stars like this. So we want to put stars around that A. If we know that it's row 3, we know that we've got this grid to put stars around. So I'm going to just highlight this so we can see what it looks like. So there we can see we are starting, if we look at the row, we are starting at row 2 and going until row 4. So basically we are going till 3 minus 1 and we are going to 3 plus 1. So that's how I determine my range of rows. So all of the rows are doing that. They're going from 3 minus 1, from 2 to 4. 3 minus 1 to 3 plus 1. Do you understand that? So whatever our access point is, we're going to minus 1 to its row and plus 1 to its row to find out the range of rows that we are looking at. Then let's look at the column. The columns are going to go from 4 to 6. So that's going to be the column minus 1 and the column plus 1, because we're going to go from 4, which is 5 minus 1, to 6, 5 plus 1. So that's going to be the range of my values. So we want to loop from 2 to 4 and from 4 to 6 and change all those values to stars, except any one that's an A. So that one we definitely don't want to change. So we don't want to change. If it's an A, don't change it. There's also a possibility. What happens if there was an A there? Then we don't want to change it to a star. So we only want to change if the cell's value is that underscore, then we want to change it to a star. So that's the range of blocks that we are looking at. So that's quite easy. So we're going to go, whenever we find an A, we're going to loop from the row's value of that A -1 to its value +1, and then we're going to loop from the column -1 to the column +1 to create that grid effect. So let's start with that. Let's go. We're going to go to the coverage button. We're going to loop through all the columns and all the rows. So we're going to have to be very careful with our variables so we don't get confused between what is what. We're going to loop through all the columns, and we know there are 6 columns. This is the end of my rcol loop, and then inside here we're going to loop through all the rows, and we know that there are 5 rows. So that's the end of the row loop. So we're going to have to keep our wits above us because we're going to have lots of these for loops here. Let's find a value. If the value that we are looking at, let's go, if my array network value at this particular row, at this particular column, if that equals to an A, then we have found something that we want to do the stars around. Okay, so when we find that, we go, okay, yes, we have found a block that we like. Now that we have found a block that we like, we want to change all of the blocks that are underscored to stars. If it's not an underscore, then leave it alone because we don't want to change any current A's to stars because that's going to override our access points. So we're now going to loop. Now remember, I told you the loop is going to be whatever the row is -1 to the row +1. So from 2 to 4, because it's 3, we're going to go from 2 to 4. And then we're going to loop for the columns -1 from 4 to 6, because it's the column -1 and the column +1. So let's do this little loop over here. So we're going to go, I'm going to make this a new variable because it's a new loop. Let's call it the new row and the new column so I don't get confused between them. So let's go. We're going to do this for loop here. For my new column is going to start wherever my previous column was -1 until my previous column +1. And then my other loop is going to be my new row, which is going to be my row value -1 until my row value +1. And what we're going to do here is we're going to change that value, that our new col, I think it's the row first, our new row, our new col, to a star, but we only want to do that if that value is not already an A. In other words, if it's an underscore. If it's an underscore, we can change it to star. If it's an A, don't do anything to it. So we only want to do this if the value that we are looking at is equal to that underscore value, because then it's not an A. If it's equal to the underscore, then change it to a star. So there are lots of begins and ends here. So let's clean it up. We are looping from 1 to 6, 1 to 5. We're going to check each of those values if it's A. If it's an A, the moment we find A, we're going to then create this new grid look where we're going to go from 1 before the row and 1 after the row and 1 before the column and 1 after the column to create that grid where we're going to change everything in that grid to stars that are underscores. If it's an A, we leave it alone. Okay, so there, technically it works, but I think there's going to be a problem, and the problem is going to be there, for example. So that, for example, is in row 1. What is 1 minus 1? 0. There is no 0 row in this table. So let's run it and see what it does. I think there are going to be errors. So let's display the results. Let's go change that access point 1 like we've got with ours. We're going to change row 3, column 1. So we're going to change that one to an access point so we can see that there's A. So let's do the coverage and then display. And there we go. It looks like it's working. Technically it's working. Was the original A and there's all stars around it. There's an A and there's all stars around it. There's an A and all stars around it. There's A. But why is there something like that over there? That is a problem. So I think because we are referring to blocks outside, I think that's why that block became a selected option. So how do we solve that? Well, the good news, by the way, the good news to note is that if we get to this point, we've probably got most of the marks anyway. So if you're running out of time, you've probably got most of the marks. But to get that final extra mark to make sure that it's working, let's take this for example. We don't ever want to -1 to ever go below 1. It must never go to 0 or less. Okay, so that's the key thing. So when we -1, we mustn't go below 1. When we +1, we must never, for example, the row mustn't ever go above 5 and the column mustn't ever go above 6. So those are things to be aware of. So when I come over here, so actually I need to find my range. Okay, so this is going to be over here. I'm going to try to find this. So my new col is my looping variable. So this is my range. So I'm going to make my max row and and my min row. So what are the rows that I can go to? So if I change this up, look how easy I'm going to do this. I'm just going to make this my I min row is going to equal to the row minus 1. So instead of using this, I can now use I min row. Does that make sense? So we just row minus 1, that's the minimum row, and we're going to do the same for my I max row. It's going to be the row value plus 1. So I'm just taking an extra step and making a variable for this. Does that all make sense? Okay, so it's exactly the same. Nothing's changed in my code at the moment with regard to how it's going to work. What I can do now, however, this min row, I want to minus 1 from the row. I want to minus 1 from the row. So if we take in row 3, we want to minus 1 to go row 2. But if I minus 1 from 1, it must not go there. If this value goes below 1, then my min row must actually become a 1, because we don't ever want to go below 1. So my min row, I worked out my min row and go, if this min row is less than 1, because we don't want to go lower than 1. If it's less than 1, then reset our min row to 1. Because we don't ever want to go lower than 1. So here, for example, this is row 1. What's 1 minus 1? That's 0. We want to loop from here to here. So let's say, so for that one, we want to loop from row 1 to row 2. So even though we are in row 1, we don't want to go to row 0. We want to go from row 1 to row 2. So if the min row is less than 1, then change it, reset it to 1. So then it will still go from 1 to 2. It'll work in that special case. And then we're going to do the same thing for the max row. If the R max row goes too big, what's too big? If the row goes beyond 5, we want to reset it back to, like over here. If we want to go to the biggest point of this, so this block over here, this access point wants to go from row 4 to 5. So if we do minus 1 from the row, from row 5, we're going to get the 4. But if I plus 1 to 5, we get 6, but there isn't a 6th row. If it goes beyond 5, then reset it back to 5. The max row mustn't go bigger than 5. So max row, if it's greater than 5, then reset it back to 5, and that way we will stay within the range. So now that we've got the rows working, we can do the exact same thing with the columns. So we're going to make an I min col, an I max col, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to say I min col is going to be the column minus 1. But if that column goes below 1, if we had, for example, like if we look at that example, if our column, which is column 1, if we go minus 1, we're going to get to column 0. If it goes below 1, we want to start at 1 rather. If our min col is less than 1, then reset our min col to 1, because we can't go below 1. And now this I min col becomes my new value for my loop over there. And then I max col is going to be set to this value, and we can replace that over there with I max col. But we don't want the maximum column to go beyond 6. So if we had an A over there, we don't want to go from 5 until 7. We want to go 5 until 6, because we can't go beyond 6. I max col is greater than 6. Then reset our max col back to 6, so that we can keep it within the range of our little blockies. And then we do our loop and go and change only those that are not an A or that are underscore to A star. I think that'll work. Let's test it now. So let's display, let's make that access point 3 1 again. Let's display it. So there we go. Let's display the coverage. Display, there we go. You can see all the A's around there are fine, all the space around that A are fine, all the space around that A are fine, all around that are fine, all around there, and that one didn't change, that one that was randomly there. So there we go. I think that is done. Okay, so there we go. Let's check if we've done everything. Display the array network after the coverage terms have been added. So we must actually write code that does the display as well. Now, because we've got the display done already over here on this button, I'm just going to call that button on the coverage. So at the end, once we've done everything, and once the loop's all done, then what you can do, instead of rewriting the code for that button, we can just call that button. So btn q41.click. In other words, we're forcing the button to be clicked by running that code. So when we display, if we display the coverage, it will do the changes and then redisplay it by clicking that button for us automatically. There we go. I think that is done. Quite complicated, but hopefully you were able to work out how I did that. Yeah, there we go. Well done, grade 12. Now go find our playlist tab and see if you can find another exam paper to practice on. Please support the channel by being a subscriber, staying a subscriber, and sharing us with your friends so we can help them as well. Follow our theory channel at Mr. Long Computer Terms on YouTube, as well as on TikTok at Mr. Long Education. And remember, don't do it the long way, do it the Mr. Long way.